Hello, I'm Kate Tuttle, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the 2022 Brooklyn Book Festival's virtual day for a conversation with the authors Hernan Diaz and Alexander Maksik. Before we start talking, I am supposed to let you know that both of these fine books by these authors can be purchased in the link you'll see below. First off, I guess I should introduce both of these men. The books are both terrific. I just read them, and I urge you to do the same. Hernan Diaz, and I'm reading from a script, so excuse me if I look away for a second, is the author of 2 novels translated into more than 20 languages. His first novel, In the Distance, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and the PEN/Faulkner Award. His latest novel is Trust. He has also written a book of essays, and his work has appeared in the Paris Review, Granta, Playboy, the Yale Review, McSweeney's, and elsewhere. He has received a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Whiting Award, the William Saroyan International Prize for Writing, and a fellowship from the New York Public Library's Cullman Center for Scholars and Writers. Alexander Maksik is the author of 4 novels: You Deserve Nothing, a New York Times and IndieBound bestseller; A Marker to Measure Drift, which was a New York Times notable book; Shelter in Place, named one of the best books of the year by The Guardian and the San Francisco Chronicle; and The Long Corner, a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice. Maksik's writing has been translated into more than a dozen languages and has appeared in many publications, including Harper's, The New Yorker, Tin House, Best American Non-Required Reading, Sewanee Review, Harvard Review, New York Times Book Review, and The Atlantic. Maksik is the recipient of Guggenheim Fellowship, a Pushcart Prize, and the Andrew Lytle Prize, as well as fellowships from the Truman Capote Literary Trust and the Corporation of Yaddo. And as I said, I'm Kate Tuttle. I run the book review section of the Boston Globe. So let's get started. These books are both so interesting, and I guess I want to toss out a question to both of you to start. Both of these books are in large measure about story and writing, and sort of who gets to tell the story, and what a writer's responsibility is to readers. I'm curious, like, how you each approached these novels, started these novels, and avoided the cliches of writers writing about writing.
Hernan, you go ahead. I have to think about that for a moment.
I thought you were being bold and taking the lead here. Well, first of all, thank you, Kate, for the wonderful introduction, and so pleased to be in conversation with you and with Alexander. I'm a big fan of book review, so this means a lot. And yeah, that was a concern, the pitfalls of that book about writing, which you don't want to do. But also, I don't know how it is for you, Alexander, but in my own work, I really try to think about cliches and commonplaces, sedimented tropes, ossified sort of devices, and I try to use them to my own advantage. And I'm hoping that the reader will be aware of all of those kind of ossified literary procedures, and that I find that that's a great way of subverting expectations, not in a manipulative sense. I'm speaking as a reader. I love to be joyfully disappointed in those ways of having the rug pulled underneath my feet. It's something that I hunt for as a reader and hope to produce. So there are so many writers that I love that have books on books. I'm a big fanatic of Jorge Luis Borges. I love Nabokov. I love Flann O'Brien. I love Cervantes. I love Muriel Spark. I mean, the list really goes on and on and on. And I was very overtly, I'm not trying to hide anything, drawing from this very disparate tradition and trying to play with it rather than writing with my back to it.
Yeah, I agree, and I have similar preoccupations. And in fact, and there was a time when I swore to myself I would never ever write a book about a writer. For years, I was appalled by particularly contemporary fiction that it seemed to follow the same pattern. It was a writer, often in Brooklyn, writing about a writer in Brooklyn and the concerns of writers in Brooklyn, and it bored me to tears. And here I am having utterly contradicted myself, and I've written a book, fortunately not about a fiction writer, but still about a writer concerned by many of the same concerns that New York writers have. And as for cliche, something that I am terrified of and a bit obsessed by, the way I dealt with it was by confronting the concern head on. And in many ways, I would describe this novel as a novel about cliche and about the ways that and really not only writers, but the way that all of us try to live some semblance of an original life, whatever that may mean, and trying to dodge all of the traps of cliche while knowing at the same time that it's really impossible. I mean, we all effectively live the same lives. And I found that to be an interesting tension. A writer trying desperately not to live a conventional life, trying not to write conventionally, while being aware all the while that these things are inevitable and unavoidable. And I hope that tension is provides some entertainment for both readers who are also writers and readers who are not.
I mean, I think, Alexander, in your book, the main character, Solomon, starts out as a magazine journalist, writes this, really lauded and award-winning long-form profile of a sculptor, which makes his fame, and then pivots into advertising, which, a kind of classic sellout. And he's not... and he seems to kind of quiver back and forth between being really ashamed of it and then at least pretending to be unashamed of it, because what the hell, like, you can't, you sort of can't avoid the topic of like how just you need to make money, you need to live a life. The title of this panel is Money and Madness, and I am interested in the way both of these books deal not only with story but with money. I mean, Hernan, your trust is explicitly about, the narrative is about all the narratives are about a very rich man and his wife, and he, Andrew Bevel, the rich man, sees making money as kind of an art form, or creating new, structures to deal with Wall Street and make a lot of money at it. I'm curious for both of you, like, tell me a little bit about how money and wealth and issues of class played into the writing of these books.
Alexander, it's your turn. I'm sorry.
Okay.
You've got to lead.
Yeah. I think I approached it. My interest was I think primarily in this notion of purity and the way the almost adolescent obsession that some of us have, and I include myself here, with artistic purity, and how we reconcile that desire to be utterly unaffected by the culture, for lack of a better word, and a desire to make money. And I think somebody who is in the world of journalism is in a slightly different position than someone who is a novelist. But nonetheless, again, the tension I was interested in was on one hand, this is somebody who doesn't have much money. There's no safety net for him. and yet he,
except for the apartment, he does have a rent-free Lower East Side apartment, which is amazing.
Of course, yes, it is amazing, and we should all be so lucky.
Exactly.
But his you know, and the pressure that comes from his family to be extreme to one side or the other, makes for a difficult life. And I was interested in, am still interested in, these stories of the pure artist. And I am aware as well of the sort of the simplistic, it is a simplistic notion that we must choose X or Y. I mean, here we are, as much as we're here to discuss books, we're also here to promote books. And they, you know, there is a school of thought that says this, even being here right now is a sort of selling out. That we are participating in self-promotion, which I think for the most pure would be a kind of failure. I don't, obviously here I am, I don't necessarily agree, but I am sympathetic to that point of view. And so to me, the tension was less about making money and more about how a writer, an artist of any kind really, struggles to maintain some sense of dignity while at the same time making a living. And so that's really, that was the seed. And I think, you know, to go back to cliche, these stories are cliches. They have become tropes in contemporary culture and in literature in particular, but everywhere. I mean, we love the story of someone like, say, Basquiat or Kurt Cobain. I mean, these are stories that we love because these are people who refused to bend, to sell out, et cetera, and they you know, all disappeared in balls of fire. That's a sexy story that we like to tell over and over again, and we tell them in ways that are not particularly nuanced. So I was interested in all of those elements and remain so.
As you said, Kate, my book is very much about money in a very explicit way, and in your sort of in your question, you bundled together money and class, which of course are tightly intertwined. But what happened and what drew me to this novel to begin with, then of course it evolved and became about many other things. But initially, one of the initial drives was that you know, looking back on the American canon, when I first thought about writing about money, I realized very quickly that there are almost no novels about money. All the novels that we think are about money are indeed about class.
Right. Sure.
Yeah. And these are different things in as much as you could claim that class is a symptom of money. It's an epiphenomenon of money. So yes, there are plenty of novels, you know, beginning, I don't know, with Henry James, with Edith Wharton, with Constance Fenimore Wilson. The novels of manners in general, you know, have to do with the you know, unbridled eccentricities of the wealthy, you know, the corseted sort of codes that ruled social interactions. Also, then you have the flip side to that, which is sort of, let's call it hastily, sort of the social realism, you know, from in American literature, from, I don't know, from Dreiser to Steinbeck or something like that, you know, which deals with the underbelly of this, with exploitation, and again with class, right? But what I noticed was that most of the money in American fiction has already been made. You know, yeah. It's like a participle. I was interested sort of in money as a gerund, you know, money making, and there are very few books about that, and that blind spot to me was very productive. It made me tick. It made me interested. it also signaled to some sort of ideological form of denial there, you know, because if money is already made, you're excused from talking about labor, from talking about financial manipulation, and so on and so forth, because, you know, money's a given.
Right.
Right. So and within the world of money making, I thought it was important to me to talk about finance capital as opposed to, you know, the manufacturing of, you know, tangible commodities or the production of services. You know, I was very drawn to the abstraction of finance capital and the disconnect between wealth and social value, which are you know, at opposite ends of a continuum, and then, you know, connecting to some extent to what Alexander was just saying, and to what you were saying at the beginning, this kind of aesthetic approach, frivolous, highly ideological approach to money as an intellectual exercise, as a thing of it's a thing of beauty, you know, of mathematical beauty, which again is a wonderful excuse to turn a blind eye on the suffering that is necessarily constitutive of any great fortune.
And yet, one of the things we learn throughout the narratives in the book is that Andrew's wife, Mildred, becomes a great philanthropist, which is traditionally the way that the very wealthy attempt to kind of atone for their sins, whether they realize it or not. And so I was curious about what you thought about. Also, she's a philanthropist who doesn't really enjoy the social life that comes with philanthropy, which I thought was sort of funny because, you know, of course, like charity balls and galas get boring, I guess, if you go to too many of them. But she seems to really hate that part of it. She only wants to help support artists, which is also the theme in both of your books, which is interesting. So tell me a little bit about, I mean, did you do research into the world of finance and philanthropy to you know, where did you find the kind of nitty-gritty real stuff in the book?
Yeah, no, I did a lot of archival work, and I, you know, a lot of it at the Cullman Center at the New York Public Library that granted me, you know, full access to, you know, rare books, manuscripts, and so on and so forth, and then other collections of real life tycoons who have, you know, preserved their papers. So I guess my research was twofold. On the one hand, and I always work with primary materials. Like I don't read a ton of history. I read more materials from the time. So I read a lot of financial treatises and you know, financial press and financial documents and statements and so on and so forth from the 20s and 30s. But then I also requested in different collections the private papers of the wives of real life tycoons, and I went through their materials, and it was really striking to see that, you know, a lot of these archival boxes had never been opened in over a century. You know, like I would undo the twine with the parcels with documents, and it would leave like this pale cross because nobody had cared to see what was in them. So it is to that extent that the voices of those women are silenced to this day. And regarding the philanthropy, I also discovered, for instance, this is a tidbit of research, the Society of Composers, founded in the mid-20s, you know, with all these male luminaries on the board, you know, Stokowski and I don't know, I forget, but it's all the big sort of European emigres from the 20s. And then there is the advisory board, and it's sort of 50 or 60 Mrs., you know, and it's all these women who only found that sort of space, and I'm sure many of them would have become amazing composers or performers themselves had they been given the chance. And I was also inspired, and I'll wrap up with this other little research anecdote, by Edith Wharton's memoir called A Backward Glance, which is a title she borrowed from Walt Whitman, where, you know, she says very overtly, it's not that she was discouraged from writing. She was forbidden effectively to do so by her parents, and had to like steal supplies to write, and you know, so in a way also I think philanthropy is sort of the little crevice that I imagine some women, it was the only available sliver into which they could perhaps channel what have no doubt was a greater ambition.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm curious about your research too, Alexander. I mean, so much of the book is really well, it's, you know, it's fantasy island. I mean, you're literally in this amazing place, this very curated space by an eccentric man about whom little is known. But there are real artists and real stories in the book as well, and I'd love to know what kind of research you did.
Honestly, I tend to avoid doing too much research, and particularly in regard to this novel, I did very, very little research aside from looking at a lot of art. I did read quite a lot of John Berger, but otherwise, this is not based on anybody in particular. It's certainly, as far as Sebastian Light goes, he is based on a variety of people I have known throughout the course of my life. And you know, he's not, I wouldn't describe him as a philanthropist, but no. I am certainly interested in the ways that people who create these environments, people who create residencies and places like the one that Sebastian Light has created, claim often to be open to all forms of art, and are then slowly tempted towards imposing influence on the artists that are invited there. And I think, you know, I have been a guest on various properties like this, and I have even known people who have built them. And I think that the temptation to control those who receive your benevolence is great, and I'm very interested in the ways that people with money and who offer a place like this can be tempted to curate, dictate, control, and oversee the people who are their guests. And I think this is a phenomenon that reveals itself in a variety of ways.
Yeah, I mean, in the book, it's taken to an extreme. Of course, the art, you know, that's created sounds like something you could buy at TJ Maxx or something, you know, with the inspirational words and whatnot. And then, of course, it also goes into this really bizarre space with sexual rituals. And I mean, surely that's not happening at Yaddo.
I mean, when I was at Yaddo, no, I wouldn't go so far as to say rituals. No, this is in no way based on my time at Yaddo. No, not at all. Though, you know, I should say I live in a place where some variation of these cult-like situations are reproduced rather regularly, and I have heard. I have not participated, I should say, but I have heard there's been, I mean, these stories are endless. And I think, you know, when someone who has a tremendous ego and a lot of money comes to a place, and Hawaii seems for all variety of reasons to draw people like this, it's not uncommon for somebody to build a world throw up walls, invite people into that world, and then exert all sorts of control. And you know, it's very easy to invent oneself as an eccentric if you have the money to do so. And eccentricity always excuses bad behavior, or can. And I think it is more common, I think, than one might imagine. Particularly in Hawaii, and maybe I'm just more exposed to these stories than I would be in another place. But these are not uncommon experiences or occurrences, I should say. And yes, of course, it is an extreme. You know, all of this is extreme, and I was doing this for the sake of drama. This is not reportage in any way, and it is not based on a particular person or place.
Yeah, of course, but it is also this kind of issue of kind of cult-like behavior, you know, among groups in the arts is not necessary. It's not new, but your book is set. It really starts when Trump is elected, and I'm curious about the why you set it now-ish, or you know, and what role Trump plays in kind of putting Solomon into a state of mind that he's ready to go.
I mean, I think like so many of us, when I was in New York when he was elected, and I remember walking out into a beautiful day and voting sort of cockily against him, and smiling at all of my smug neighbors, and we all thought this is a joke, and slowly we watched what happened happen. And it was an appalling, terrifying moment. And I think what followed that moment was a kind of panic that drove many of the people I knew in New York to all kinds of extremes. And I was interested in and remain interested in the ways in which Trump's sort of arrival on the scene has driven people on the right further to the right, people on the left, and I count myself among those people on the left, further to the left, and primarily interested in the ways that division has impacted the world of art, and you know, frankly, the world of literature in particular. And I wanted to explore that. I see Sebastian Light very much as a Trump-like figure, somebody who has absolute ideas about what is right and what is wrong, and an unabashed desire to impose those ideas on the people who are effectively in his employ. So that's sort of how I imagined it.
You know, it's interesting how much politics you know, occur in both of your books. There's I think, Hernan, in your book, the politics are most overtly stated in the Ida section when she's talking about her father, who's an anarchist. But of course, money, the market, and politics are always intertwined. When did you write this book, and was Trump and like our current political situation in your mind while you were, you know, casting yourself back to the 20s and 20s, I guess?
Yeah, how could it not be? I mean, as Alexander was saying, it was the ground shifting underneath us, and the sense of disorientation and fear was just really, really absolute. What happened is here's what happened. I'm not an allegorical writer. I'm not into allegorical literature. I'm also not good at recording either my own immediate experiences or the immediate reality around me. I'm more about sort of distance and mediations and almost like tectonic layers, and try. I strive to disappear from what I write, and also sort of my circumstances. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. It's just the kind of writer that I am. But what happened was, and this brings us back to the archival work and all of that, you know, as I was writing the book, you know, I was reading about Harding, who ran under the slogan "America First," who enacted all these, isolationist, exceptionalist measures, who imposed protective tariffs, who cut taxes for the wealthy from like something like from 72% to like 20%. I was reading about Coolidge, who with his Immigration Quota Act of 1924, restricted immigration from very specific countries, not all countries and regions. Italy, Asia, you weren't allowed to enter into the United States. Who also vetoed aid for the vets coming back from World War I. Deregulated markets and Wall Street to extent. I was effectively like a free market lunatic, and small government, big business. Famously said, it's a misquote, but it doesn't matter. The business of America is business. Appointed his rich friends to very important cabinet positions on the assumption that because they were wealthy, they were effective government officials. Stop me when any of this, rings a bell. So it was kind of shocking to see this continuity between the 1920s and the 2020s. It's not something that I set out to find. It was not dots that I was trying to connect. They were just there, and I think conservatives call themselves that for a very good reason. It's been the same sort of playbook for, at the very least, 100 years, and together with that, and I think the middle point there, that it's also referenced in the second part of the book, in this boisterous mansplaining kind of voice that is also very Trumpy. Like I was trying to purge all this awfulness that I received every day through the media. I was saying, I think the connecting bridge there is sort of the 80s and Ronald Reagan and Milton Friedman. So I became very aware in a well-documented way of what was an intuition of this arc of conservatism in the United States, and became increasingly interested in it. And just to say, as a quick aside, I don't want to take up too much time. It was also interesting to me to deal with this Italian anarchist immigrant, because I feel that at the turn of the 19th to 20th century and the first couple of decades of the 20th century, it was the only time the United States had a real decent shot at having a proper left, which of course we don't have. And spearheading that attempt were massively Italian immigrants who were persecuted, lynched, and effectively assassinated by the state. I mean, the most conspicuous case we know is Zacco and Vanzetti, right? So it was important to me also to talk about that, because it's an under-recorded moment in American history too that has been all but erased. So I wanted to pitch these two things together, because we usually just talk about the sort of the jazz age, which is a term that I loathe, but forget what was going on socially otherwise. Yeah.
It's so interesting. There was a professor at Harvard years ago, Professor Berkovich, and his first name is Sackban, and it's because his parents named him after Sacco and Vanzetti. He was a red pepper baby. Yeah.
Wow, that's
I don't think he's still with us, but yeah, it's fascinating. I feel like a lot of that history is not remembered very clearly or taught.
Can I just interject very briefly? Like, I tried to, of course, find documents, and I had like this crazy access to archives. There is nothing. there's nothing. There's at the New York Public
Really?
Library. Yeah, there's like a broken collection on microfiche of one of the nearly 400 anarchist periodicals that were published over those 30 years or so, and the records are scanned, and it's not just because it happened. I think it's
right, exactly. No, it's fascinating. I was curious, Alexander, about there are politics in your book as well, and the Solomon's mother and grandmother kind of facing off, kind of generational divide, but also a philosophical divide. It's political. One's a Marxist who becomes an ardent Zionist. The other's sort of a kind of a free spirit. And I mean, the grandmother is such a beautiful character. She's so lovely. I know novelists hate this question, but was she based on anybody?
I honestly, I wish that there were someone in my life like that, as close as I in some way, biographical details aside, my own grandmother, in spirit, I think there's something of my grandmother's spirit, though she was nothing like this.
Yeah.
It's almost, this is what I imagine my grandmother might have been had she not married my grandfather. She had a very interesting life, and I think was trapped a bit by my grandfather, and devoted her life, as did so many women at that time, to her husband. And in some way, she is an homage to my grandmother, or to a version of my grandmother that never existed.
Yeah. Well, both of these women have no men in their lives to oppress them. At least, which is sort of, I guess they're lucky. I also want to just jump in and mention to people watching that you can feel free to submit a question via Crowdcast, and maybe we'll read it. The sort of ideas of family and lineage are really important in trust. And there's this whole, I think there's a section, Hernan, where you talk about the different generations of financiers in American history, and they're represented by each of these different men. I think it's fascinating. Was that, how much of that has any kind of personal, family, when you write about this sort of dynastic stuff, was that mostly from your reading of history, or did you have a family that thought of itself that way as well?
Oh, no, not the latter, not the second thing you said. My family has a somewhat shallow history. There are many unknowns about, our family tree is very truncated for a number of reasons. So perhaps I was drawn to that because it's not something that I have, that sense of depth by which your own lineage connects with a historical trunk of a nation. Also, I am an immigrant. I'm the son of immigrants in different countries, and so it's all a blip everywhere. So I don't have that at all. I think the importance of genealogy in trust is at least twofold. First, it has to do with this very Marxian notion of primitive accumulation, that fortunes aren't made. It's some kind of expropriation that took place in the past and then was passed on. It is not a coincidence that I chose tobacco as the beginning of this history, because every great fortune in the United States is rooted in slavery, undeniably. And so that was one side of my interest in genealogy. I think the other side, which was at the inception of the book, is that the sort of the self-aggrandizing myths that capital weaves around itself are all about great, supposedly self-made men. You know, there simply are no women in those stories. And I, you know, for a long time, I only read autobiographies written by these great men, you know, sort of between Franklin and Hoover, sort of that was the time frame I gave myself. And all women there are, you know, mothers or wives, and that's it. They play absolutely no role. And then a little later they maybe become secretaries, which is another figure that I was very, very interested in exploring, because it completely reshaped modern society, the moment where women became part of the white collar labor force, and keepers of secrets, you know, which is what secretary means. So
oh wow. Yeah. I literally never thought of that until just now.
Yeah. No, I try to squeeze that out of the word as much as I could, and you know, that's a big part of the plot of the book.
Sure. I mean, there's, you know, the book, for folks who haven't read it yet, is divided into 4 different narratives. There's the novel about the man, then there's the man's kind of notes for his memoir, then there's the narrative of the secretary telling the story of, or trying to write the memoir with the man, and then there's the diary of the wife toward the end. And I am curious how you as a writer approached and found the different tones for those 4 different, very different narratives.
Well, you know, as I was saying a moment ago, I realized very quickly, you know, that this book was even more than about money, was about voice, and who had been given sort of a megaphone in history to proclaim their supposed truths over centuries, and who had been effectively gagged. So instead of merely, you know, thematizing the issue of voice, I thought, why not enact it formally, which is effectively what the book does. Hence, sort of this polyphonic, choral, chord-like structure, you know, harmonic structure of these 4 voices. And I also thought it would be an opportunity to write in literary styles that I admire and I'm interested in, and that I otherwise couldn't do. Like, again, turn of the century sort of pseudo Jamesian prose. That's the first book, but the third book is, you know, it's very new journalism. It's very Lillian Roth, a little bit Didion-esque. The 4th book is sort of a high modernist prose poem. And so not only is it about voice in a very political sense, but it's also about exploring different possibilities of the novel as a form, in moments, zeroing in on moments that I am interested in for my own, you know, because of my own taste. There is no objective reason why these moments are particularly important objectively. So yeah, I hope that was not too confusing.
No, that totally makes sense.
Okay.
I want to ask you too, Alexander, about, I mean, your book is more straightforward in form. And yet the voice here too is very, it changes throughout the book as things for Solomon get stranger. There's sort of some tonal shifts that I find interesting. And I'm curious what it was like, the challenge of kind of telling this very odd story that gets odder and odder. Like, did you, as a writer, what were the challenges there?
we began this conversation by talking about cliche, and what I wanted to do from the very beginning was to demonstrate just how difficult it is to avoid the cliches, particularly when you're steeped in the language of advertising, as we all are, but particularly somebody who makes his money, his fortune in the world of advertising. So while at the same time Saul is complaining about this culture that he is part of, the very language that he uses to complain about this culture is reflecting the culture, is reflecting the language. He cannot avoid the traps of the most obvious alliterative language. He keeps falling into slogans, even though he is railing against slogans.
Right.
All of his observations are these little sort of perfectly shaped nuggets that would be perfect to advertise Coca-Cola or McDonald's. And so I wanted him to begin that way, to almost be contradicting himself linguistically, even though what he is saying with that language is noble. The language itself demonstrates his failure. That was the idea. And then gradually, as he progresses through this bizarre adventure, the language, I hope, changes and loses some of that slickness that is there in the beginning, and that he ends on a sort of more almost elegiac, but elegy aside, there's a sincerity and a depth and even a level of love in the very language he uses at the end of the book. And I hope that is suggestive of some sort of emotional progress. And so that was the balance I was after. And I liked the idea of somebody who is as sarcastic and angry as he is, so sure of himself, so moralistic, and yet it is his very sentences that betray, the hollowness, at least at the beginning of his argument.
Well, it's interesting too that he, because when he enters this space that Light has built, he's so bothered by the kind of facile language and the kitschy art. It all offends him, and he only feels connected to people when he can sort of banter with them and joke and be a little bit sarcastic, which Light says, it's terrible, this is the New York in you or whatever. Right. And of course his own father had said, this is what Jews are good at. Like, yeah. What does it mean to be Jewish? That we banter, we have this conversation. Yeah. It's interesting, like how identity and his own being Jewish, like how does that play into that book for you?
I mean, this is a question I ask myself all the time. I mean, I am Jewish on both sides, and yet I have no real Jewish education beyond the most superficial. I grew up in a place where everybody was being bar and bat mitzvah, and I went to bar and bat mitzvahs at the time that was happening. I didn't know anybody who wasn't Jewish for at least the first 14 years of my life. And I feel Jewish, though I cannot tell you exactly what that means. And I'm constantly having conversations with other Jews who feel similarly and have had similar upbringings. And I moved from Los Angeles, where everybody I knew was Jewish when I was quite young, to Idaho, where practically nobody I knew was Jewish. And it was it was then that I was exposed to explicit anti-Semitism, where somebody, in the first 2 weeks I was there, somebody said, "Don't Jew me," without knowing that I was Jewish. Wow. And so I have relatively recently had a child. So all of these questions about what it means to be Jewish, without going to synagogue, without having an education, this was a question that was very much at the forefront of my mind while I was writing this book.
So we just have a couple of minutes left, maybe 1 minute. I would love you each to give me sort of a 30-second answer about,
oh boy.
I know, because this is the Brooklyn Book Festival, and both of your books are set at least partly or fully in New York. I guess, I don't know. When did you first move to New York, and where did you first live in New York?
I moved to New York in 1999, and I moved to Williamsburg because it was very cheap and lived in what used to be a doll factory. And then
God.
Yes. And then, you know, with middle age, I was expelled from Williamsburg, and now I'm very close to the Brooklyn Book Festival.
And Alexander?
I moved to New York in 2012 and left around 2017. I mean, my family is from New York, at least on my dad's side. You know, I descend from New York Jews, but I don't consider myself in any real way a New Yorker, and New York doesn't play a significant part in my life, or if I have one, my identity.
If you have one.
If I have one.
Well, on that note, I think I should end this. I've really enjoyed talking to you both. I wish we could talk longer. Thank you, Hernan Diaz.
Thank you.
Maksik. A little note that I've been asked to read. Everyone, please remember you can order books in the link below, and please consider making a donation to the Brooklyn Book Festival, which is celebrating its 17th year of presenting free literary programming, which is like great. And a reminder, if you are in New York City next week, the in-person festival takes place on October 2nd in downtown Brooklyn. If you're lucky, you might run into Hernan Diaz getting his, coffee. Thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you, Kate. You've been fabulous. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alexander.
Thank you, Hernan.